I stood in my grandmother's empty driveway, staring at the sold sign stabbed into the lawn like a knife through my heart. The lakefront cottage where I'd spent every summer of my childhood was gone, stripped bare, stolen from me. My father appeared with a $15,000 check, smirking as he ordered me to disappear from Michigan forever. He thought he'd won. He thought his gambling debts and criminal schemes had finally destroyed me completely. What he didn't realize was that 3 days earlier, I'd discovered everything. His lies, his theft, his plan to frame me for his crimes while he escaped to Mexico with millions. I just smiled back at him because Thomas had no idea what I'd already done to protect myself. The flight from Seattle had been turbulent, but nothing compared to the storm waiting for me in northern Michigan. After a week of consulting on waterfront architecture projects, I was exhausted and eager to return to my sanctuary. The 2-hour drive from Grand Rapids to the cottage always calmed my nerves, especially the final stretch where Lake Huron came into view through the towering pine trees. But something was wrong the moment I turned onto Lakeshore Drive. Moving trucks sat in my circular driveway. Men in blue coveralls carried furniture from my front porch, loading my grandmother's antique dining set into a massive trailer. I slammed on the brakes and jumped out of my car, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Stop! What are you doing with my things?" I shouted, running toward the nearest worker. The man barely glanced up from the mahogany armoire he was wrapping in blankets. "Lady, we got our orders. Everything goes to storage today." "Porridge. This is my house. You can't just take my belongings." He pulled out a crumpled work order and showed me the signature at the bottom. Thomas Morrison. My father's name written in his distinctive scrawl across legal documents I'd never seen before. My hand shook as I fumbled for my phone, dialing my father's number while watching strangers cart away 27 years of memories. The call went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Still nothing. "Diana." "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry." Mrs. Henderson's voice called from across the street. My elderly neighbor hurried over, her face creased with worry. "I tried calling you yesterday, but they said you were unreachable." "What happened here, Mrs. Henderson? Why are these people taking everything?" She wrung her hands nervously. "Your father came by with all these papers, said the house was sold and had to be cleared out immediately. The new owners wanted possession by today. I didn't know what to think, dear. It seemed so sudden." The world tilted sideways. "Sold. That's impossible. This cottage belongs to me. Grandma Rose left it to me in her will 5 years ago." "I know, sweetie. That's what I thought too. But your father had all the documentation, even brought a notary to witness everything. Said there were financial problems and the sale was necessary to cover debts." I staggered toward the front door, my legs unsteady. The cottage stood open, completely gutted. Bare walls where my grandmother's paintings had hung. Empty spaces where her reading chair had sat by the stone fireplace. The wide plank floors echoed hollowly under my footsteps. That's when I saw it. The fireplace looked different. Wrong somehow. The stones around the hearth had been disturbed, mortar dust scattered across the floor. Behind the firebox where my grandmother's secret safe had been hidden for decades, a gaping hole stared back at me. Someone had found her hiding place. The safe was gone along with the $50,000 in emergency cash she'd kept there since the 1980s. Money she'd saved from her teaching salary and hidden away for family emergencies, telling only me about its existence before she died. "Diana!" My father's voice came from behind me, cold and measured. I spun around to find him standing in the doorway, wearing his best suit, and an expression I'd never seen before. Calculating. Almost cruel. "Dad, what have you done? This is my cottage. Grandma left it to me, not you." Thomas stepped inside his footsteps, sharp against the empty floors. Things change, sweetheart. Circumstances require difficult decisions. The family business has debts that needed immediate attention. What debts? Morrison Construction has been profitable for years. I've seen the books. He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and handed it to me. Inside was a cashier's check for $15,000 made out in my name. This should cover your expenses while you get settled somewhere new. I suggest California, or maybe Florida, somewhere far from Michigan. I stared at the check, my mind reeling. Far from Michigan, Dad, this is my home. You can't just sell someone else's property without permission. Actually, I can. He produced another set of papers from his briefcase. Power of attorney granted to me when you were hospitalized after that car accident last winter. You signed it yourself, remember? Gave me full authority over your assets in case of emergency. My blood ran cold. The accident had been minor. A fender bender in a snowstorm that left me with a concussion and 2 nights in the hospital for observation. I barely remembered signing anything, but the documents looked official. Notarized. Legal. This is fraud, Dad. I never gave you permission to sell my cottage. His expression hardened. The sale is final, Diana. The new owners take possession tomorrow morning. You need to accept reality and move on with your life. Who bought it? Maybe I can talk to them, explain the situation. That's not your concern anymore. Take the money, pack what's left of your personal items, and start fresh somewhere else. Consider it a gift. I looked around the empty cottage one more time, feeling my grandmother's presence in the shadows. Rose Morrison had built this place with her own hands after Grandpa died, turning a rundown fishing cabin into a masterpiece of rustic architecture. She'd taught me to love craftsmanship, attention to detail, the satisfaction of creating something beautiful and lasting. Now it was gone, stolen by my own father for reasons I couldn't understand. I need time to process this, I said quietly. Thomas checked his expensive watch. The movers finish in 2 hours. After that, you're trespassing. Don't make this harder than necessary. He turned and walked out, leaving me alone in the shell of my childhood. But as I stood there listening to his car engine fade down the driveway, I realized something that made my hands stop shaking. 3 days ago, I'd found betting slips hidden in his desk at the office. Thousands of dollars worth of gambling receipts from the new casino 40 miles south of town. My father had been lying about more than just the cottage sale. And if he thought one forged power of attorney would let him destroy my life, he was about to learn exactly how wrong he could be. The Morrison construction office sat empty at 8 in the morning, which should have been impossible. Our crews started work at 7 sharp every day, and the parking lot should have been full of pickup trucks and equipment trailers. Instead, I found only Martha's blue Honda and a handful of abandoned coffee cups scattered across the front steps. Martha Steinberg had been my father's secretary for 12 years, and the worry lines around her eyes told me everything before she spoke a word. Diana, thank goodness you're here. I didn't know who else to call. Where is everyone, Martha? Where are the crews? She glanced around nervously, then motioned me into the main office. Your father let most of them go last month. Said we were downsizing due to economic conditions. But the bills keep piling up and clients are calling about unfinished projects. I walked through the office space, noticing details that hadn't registered before my trip to Seattle. Half the desks stood empty. File cabinets had been cleared out. The large project planning board where we tracked active construction jobs showed only 3 small renovations in progress. Martha, how long has the company been in trouble? She pulled out a stack of invoices and spread them across her desk. It started about 6 months ago. Your father began spending more time away from the office, said he was pursuing new business opportunities. But the bank started calling in February, asking about missed payments on equipment loans. Equipment loans. We own our machinery outright. That's what I thought too. But apparently your father took out new loans against the excavators and dump trucks. use the money for something he called investment diversification. I sat down heavily in my father's leather chair, my mind racing. Martha, I need you to show me everything. Every invoice, every bank statement, every contract from the last year. She hesitated. Your father said never to let anyone see the financial records. Said it was confidential business information. I'm part owner of this company, have been since I turned 25. I have every right to examine the books. For the next 3 hours, Martha and I went through every document in the office. What we found made my stomach twist with dread. Morrison Construction was not just struggling. It was completely destroyed. My father had been systematically stealing from client escrow accounts for months. Mrs. Patterson's kitchen renovation had been paid in full, but the money never reached our subcontractors. The Jenkins family had given us $40,000 for a garage addition, but their project remained unfinished while the cash disappeared into Thomas's personal accounts. Even worse, I discovered he'd been forging my signature on loan applications and credit line documents. The bank records showed my name attached to 6-figure debts I'd never authorized, equipment purchases I'd never approved, business partnerships with companies I'd never heard of. Martha, do you know where my father spends his evenings? He's been avoiding my calls for weeks. She looked uncomfortable. I probably shouldn't say anything, but he's been going to that new casino down in Mount Pleasant. Sometimes he doesn't come back for days. The casino. He started going there right after it opened last winter, said he was networking with potential clients. But I found these in his desk drawer last week. She handed me a shoebox filled with betting slips, credit card receipts, and handwritten IOUs. The amounts made me dizzy. $5,000 on poker games, $10,000 on blackjack tables, $20,000 borrowed from something called Riverside Financial Services at 30% interest. My father wasn't just gambling. He was losing catastrophic amounts of money and borrowing from loan sharks to cover his bets. Martha, I need you to call my cousin Jake immediately. Tell him it's urgent legal business and I need to see him today. Jake Morrison ran a small law practice in Bay City handling mostly real estate and family matters. We'd grown up together, spending summers at the Cottage building forts and catching fireflies. If anyone could help me understand the legal mess my father had created, it would be him. 2 hours later, Jake sat across from me in his cluttered office, reading through the documents I'd brought with growing alarm. Diana, this is bad, really bad. Your father has been committing systematic fraud for months. Can he legally sell my cottage using that power of attorney? Jake shook his head grimly. Not unless you were actually incapacitated. A minor concussion doesn't qualify for the kind of broad authority he's claiming here. But there's something else you need to know. He pulled up a computer screen showing property records from the county clerk's office. Your cottage isn't just sold, Diana. It's been used as collateral for multiple loans over the past 6 months. Your father mortgaged it 3 separate times using forged documents with your signature. The room started spinning. That means the people who bought your cottage aren't regular home buyers. They're representatives of the loan companies your father owes money to. They're seizing the property to cover his gambling debts. I stared at the screen, watching the legal details blur together. How much does he owe in total? Jake's fingers moved across the keyboard, adding up figures from different sources. Based on what I can find in public records, at least $400,000. Probably more from private lenders who don't report to credit agencies. Private lenders? Loan sharks, Diana. The kind of people who break legs when payments are late. Your father hasn't just stolen your cottage, he's put your entire family in danger. I leaned back in the uncomfortable office chair, feeling the weight of betrayal settle into my bones. But underneath the shock and anger, something else was building. A cold, calculating fury that reminded me exactly whose granddaughter I was. Rose Morrison hadn't raised me to be a victim. She'd taught me to think ahead, plan carefully, and never let anyone take advantage of my kindness. It was time to put those lessons to work. Jake, I need you to do something for me, and I need you to do it quietly. What do you have in mind? I want you to freeze every account Thomas has access to, put holds on all the company credit lines, file injunctions against any further property transfers, make it impossible for him to move another dime without my permission. Jake looked skeptical. That's going to be difficult without proof of fraud. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, scrolling to a folder of photographs I'd taken 3 days earlier. Will this help? The images showed my father's handwriting on dozens of forged documents, bank statements with altered amounts, contracts with signatures that didn't match my actual penmanship, even a practice sheet where he'd been learning to copy my name. Where did you get these? I've been investigating him since last week. Found all of this hidden in his office safe when I went looking for the quarterly tax documents. Jake studied the photos with growing amazement. Diana, this is enough evidence to send him to prison for years. Why didn't you tell me about this sooner? Because I wanted to see how far he'd go. I wanted to catch him in the act of destroying me completely. And now, I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the busy street where normal people were living normal lives, unaware that their trust in family could be shattered in an instant. Now I'm going to destroy him first. The threatening phone call came at 3 a.m, 2 days after my meeting with Jake. A gravelly voice with a slight accent demanded that I pay Thomas's debts within 72 hours or face consequences that would make my father's problems seem trivial. I sat up in my temporary hotel room, fully alert despite the early hour. I think you have the wrong number. I don't owe anyone money. Diana Morrison, right, Thomas Morrison's daughter. You inherited his obligations when you took over the family business. Our records show you're now responsible for his outstanding balance. What outstanding balance? $350,000 plus interest and penalties. Your father signed documents transferring his debts to you as part of his bankruptcy protection strategy. My hands went cold. That's impossible. I never signed anything like that. Check your mailbox, sweetheart. We sent you copies last month. The line went dead, leaving me staring at the hotel room ceiling as dawn crept through the curtains. I'd been staying at a chain motel near the office since losing the cottage, avoiding my apartment in case my father tried to contact me there. But if someone was sending me legal documents, I needed to check my mail immediately. An hour later, I stood in the lobby of my apartment complex, sorting through 3 weeks of accumulated envelopes. Most were routine bills and advertisements, but buried near the bottom, I found a thick package from something called Great Lakes Recovery Services. The documents inside made my blood freeze. Legal papers claiming that Thomas Morrison had declared bankruptcy and transferred all his business debts to Diana Morrison as part of a family succession plan. Loan agreements with my forged signature, accepting responsibility for massive gambling debts. Even a notarized statement claiming I had agreed to take over his obligations in exchange for control of Morrison Construction. Every single document was fake, but they looked completely legitimate. Professional letterhead, official seals, witness signatures from people I'd never met. My phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed Bay City Police Department. Miss Morrison, this is Detective Rodriguez. We need you to come to the station immediately for questioning regarding financial crimes involving Morrison Construction. Detective, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm the victim here, not the perpetrator. Ma'am, we have evidence suggesting you've been embezzling from client accounts and falsifying loan applications. You need to come in voluntarily, or we'll issue a warrant for your arrest. I hung up the phone with shaking hands and immediately called Jake. His assistant said he was in court all morning, but would call back as soon as possible. I tried his cell phone and got voicemail. That's when I realized how completely my father had outmaneuvered me. While I'd been gathering evidence of his crimes, he'd been planting evidence that I was the criminal. Every forged document, every stolen dollar, every fraudulent loan had been carefully crafted to make me look like the mastermind while he played the role of innocent victim. I drove straight to the police station knowing that running would only make me look guilty. Detective Rodriguez was a serious woman in her 40s who treated me with professional courtesy but obvious suspicion. Miss Morrison, we've received multiple complaints about Morrison Construction failing to complete paid work and missing client funds. Your signature appears on numerous financial documents authorizing these transactions. She showed me copies of contracts and bank transfers that looked exactly like my handwriting. If I hadn't known they were forgeries, I would have believed I'd signed them myself. Detective, those signatures are fake. My father has been forging my name for months to cover up his gambling addiction. Do you have proof of that accusation? I thought about the photographs on my phone but realized they only showed Thomas practicing my signature. They didn't prove he'd actually used the forgeries for criminal purposes. In fact, they might make me look paranoid and unstable. I'm working with my attorney to gather evidence, but I need you to understand that I'm being framed for crimes I didn't commit. Detective Rodriguez made notes in her file. Miss Morrison, we've also received information that you've been threatening creditors and attempting to hide company assets. Federal investigators are reviewing the case for possible racketeering charges. Federal investigators. The FBI opened a file on Morrison Construction last month. Money laundering, wire fraud, and organized crime connections. Your father claims you've been working with casino associates to wash gambling proceeds through construction projects. I felt the room spinning around me. Thomas hadn't just stolen my cottage and forged my signature. He'd constructed an elaborate criminal conspiracy with me as the fall guy while he prepared to disappear with all the money. Detective, I want to cooperate fully with your investigation, but I need protection. The real criminals have been threatening me and my family. What kind of threats? I showed her the recovery service documents and played the voicemail from the threatening caller. But instead of concern, I saw skepticism in her eyes. Miss Morrison, this looks like a business dispute between you and your creditors. Nothing here suggests criminal threats. They're not my creditors. They're loan sharks my father borrowed from. Can you prove that? I realized I was trapped in a perfect frame job. Every piece of evidence I had against Thomas could be interpreted as evidence of my own guilt. Meanwhile, he had months of forged documents showing me as the primary actor in every criminal transaction. That afternoon, I sat in Jake's office feeling more defeated than I'd ever felt in my life. Diana, I've been reviewing everything with a federal defense attorney. The case against you is incredibly sophisticated. Whoever planned this spent months creating false documentation. It was my father, Jake. He's been setting me up since last winter. I believe you, but proving it will be almost impossible. The FBI thinks you're the mastermind, and Thomas is just a foolish old man who trusted the wrong daughter. So what happens now? Jake's expression was grim. They're offering a plea bargain. 5 years in federal prison, full restitution to the victims, and forfeiture of all your assets. If you fight the charges and lose at trial, you could face 20 years. I stared out his office window at the parking lot where my father's truck had been sitting when I arrived. Thomas was here, probably meeting with investigators and playing the role of cooperative victim while I faced prison time for his crimes. Jake, what if I told you I had a way to prove my innocence? Something my father doesn't know about. What do you mean? I smiled for the first time in days, remembering my grandmother's lessons about patience planning and the importance of keeping important secrets. 3 days before I found those betting slips in his office, I installed recording devices in his car and workspace. I have hours of audio proving he committed every one of these crimes. Jake's eyes widened. Diana, that's illegal surveillance. The recordings might not be admissible in court. Maybe not in court, but they'll be very useful for negotiating with federal agents who think I'm the criminal. You recorded him confessing to fraud. I recorded him planning the entire frame job, including exactly how he intended to disappear to Mexico with $2 million while I rotted in prison for his crimes. Jake leaned back in his chair, studying me with new respect. You knew this was coming. I knew my father was a gambler and a thief. I didn't know he was smart enough to destroy me so completely. But thanks to Grandma Rose, I learned never to enter a battle without preparation. What do you want to do? I stood up and straightened my jacket, feeling my grandmother's strength flowing through my veins. I want to arrange a meeting with Agent Walsh from the FBI. It's time to let my father know exactly what happens when you underestimate a Morrison woman. 3 days before I discovered the empty cottage, I had been working late at the Morrison construction office, trying to finish quarterly tax preparations before my Seattle trip. The building was quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic on Main Street. I needed the previous year's receipts from my father's desk, so I used my master key to enter his private office. Thomas had always been secretive about his workspace, but as part owner of the company, I had legitimate access to any business documents. That's when I found the shoebox hidden behind his filing cabinet. Inside were dozens of betting slips from Golden Eagle Casino, each one representing hundreds or thousands of dollars in losses. Poker games, blackjack tables, sports betting on college football games. The dates went back 6 months, and the amounts made my hands shake. But the betting slips weren't what made me start recording everything. At the bottom of the box, I found a handwritten notebook filled with my father's distinctive scrawl. Page after page of planning, scheming, and careful preparation for what he called the Diana solution. The first entry was dated January 15th, just 2 days after my minor car accident. Hospital visit, perfect opportunity. Diana was confused from concussion signed power of attorney without reading details. Can use this to access her cottage deed and other assets if necessary. Need to move carefully established paper trail, showing her as primary decision maker for all business activities. I sat in his leather chair reading entry after entry that detailed exactly how he planned to destroy my life. February 3rd, opened new bank accounts using Diana's social security number and forged signature, depositing casino loans under her name to establish pattern of suspicious activity. February 21st, modified company insurance policies to show Diana as sole beneficiary and decision maker. If investigation occurs, she will appear to be primary benefactor of any fraud. March 9th, casino debts now exceed $300,000. Need to accelerate timeline. Diana's cottage worth enough to cover obligations and provide escape money. March 27th, contacted Riverside Financial about transferring debt obligations to Diana's name. They agreed to modified payment structure if she assumes full responsibility for outstanding balance. The notebook contained detailed plans for forging my signature, creating false documents, and even scripts for conversations with bank officials and investigators. My father had been practicing my handwriting for months, perfecting every curve and flourish until he could duplicate my signature flawlessly. But the final entries were what made me realize I was in immediate danger. April 2nd, Diana, returning from Seattle trip on Friday, must complete cottage sale and present her with fait accompli. Have prepared explanation blaming business debts and family obligations. $15,000 should keep her quiet while I relocate to Mexico. April 4th, FBI contact Agent Walsh seems interested in Morrison construction finances. Perfect timing to shift blame to Diana. All documentation points to her as embezzler and primary criminal actor. My cooperation with investigation will support victim narrative. April 5th. Final preparations complete. Diana's signature on file with all relevant agencies. Cottage sale proceeds will cover casino debts and provide six-figure escape fund. New identity documents prepared for Mexican relocation. Diana will face charges within 1 week of Cottage discovery. I photographed every page of the notebook with my phone, then carefully returned it to its hiding place. My hands were steady despite the rage building in my chest. Grandma Rose had taught me that anger without planning was just noise, but anger combined with preparation could move mountains. Over the next 2 days, I implemented my own secret strategy. First, I contacted Patricia Huang, a forensic accountant I'd worked with on construction disputes. Without revealing the full situation, I hired her to trace all financial transactions involving Morrison Construction over the previous year. Patricia was brilliant at finding hidden money trails and documenting financial fraud. Diana, these bank records show systematic embezzlement, Patricia told me during our confidential meeting. Someone has been stealing from client accounts and using forged authorizations to access company assets, but the paper trail is designed to make you look like the perpetrator. Can you prove the forgeries? With the right handwriting analysis and document examination, yes, but you'll need original samples of the fraudulent signatures and access to the real banking records. I showed her photographs of my father's practice sheets. Will this help? Patricia studied the images with growing excitement. This is smoking gun evidence. Whoever created these forgeries spent months perfecting the technique. But they left a clear trail of preparation that proves premeditation. Next, I visited an electronics store in Bay City and purchased small recording devices designed for business meetings. The salesman showed me how to hide them in car interiors and office spaces activated by voice recognition software that would automatically start recording when conversations began. These units can record for up to 72 hours on a single charge, he explained. The audio quality is good enough for legal proceedings, and they're small enough to conceal almost anywhere. I installed one device under my father's desk at the office and another in his truck's glove compartment. Then I waited for him to reveal his plans in his own words. The recordings exceeded my expectations. On my first night in Seattle, Thomas made phone calls from his office that captured every detail of his criminal conspiracy. Agent Walsh, this is Thomas Morrison returning your call about the construction company investigation. I want to cooperate fully with your inquiry into my daughter's financial activities. Yes, Diana has been acting strangely for months, making unauthorized transactions, meeting with unknown associates, talking about large cash payments for unnamed services. I found evidence that she's been embezzling from client accounts to fund gambling activities at local casinos. She threatened me when I confronted her about it. No, I don't think she'll cooperate voluntarily. Diana has become paranoid and hostile. She claims I'm trying to steal from her, but the documentation clearly shows she's been the primary actor in all questionable transactions. I have copies of signed authorizations for every suspicious bank transfer. Diana's signature appears on all the relevant documents. I can provide everything to your investigators. Additional recordings captured Thomas meeting with casino representatives and loan sharks negotiating payment schedules and discussing plans for disappearing to Mexico. He even practiced emotional speeches about being betrayed by his trusted daughter. But the most valuable recording came from a conversation with his gambling associate Marcus. The cottage sale closes tomorrow. $2 million minus the casino debt leaves me about $600,000 to start fresh in Cancun. Diana will be arrested within a week. The FBI has enough evidence to convict her of money laundering and racketeering. She'll get 20 years minimum. I've been building this frame job since January. Every signature is perfect. Every document looks legitimate. The beauty is that Diana's own trust in me made her an easy target. She never suspected anything until it was too late. By the time she figures out what happened, I'll be drinking margaritas on a beach, and she'll be in federal prison. The cottage was the key to everything. Rose left it to Diana, but the power of attorney gives me complete control. Selling it not only covers my debts, but provides evidence that Diana authorized the transaction. While Thomas was planning my destruction, I was also meeting secretly with FBI agent Sarah Walsh. She had contacted me 2 weeks before my Seattle trip asking questions about Morrison Construction's financial activities. Instead of hiding from the investigation, I decided to cooperate fully and document everything. Miss Morrison, we've received reports about suspicious transactions involving your construction company. Agent Walsh explained during our first meeting. Large cash deposits, unexplained asset transfers, and possible connections to organized gambling operations. Agent Walsh, I think my father has been committing crimes and trying to frame me for them. I have evidence that he's been forging my signature and stealing from our clients. That's a serious accusation. What kind of evidence? I showed her the photographs of Thomas's planning notebook and the forged signature practice sheets. Agent Walsh studied them with professional interest. This suggests premeditated fraud on a significant scale, but we need more than photographs to build a criminal case. What if I could provide audio recordings of him confessing to everything? How would you obtain those recordings? He doesn't know I suspect anything yet. I could wear a wire during conversations or place recording devices where he might speak freely. Agent Walsh leaned forward. Miss Morrison, are you volunteering to act as an undercover informant in a federal investigation? I'm volunteering to help you catch a criminal who happens to be my father. We worked together for 2 weeks with Agent Walsh, providing technical support and legal guidance while I gathered evidence. The FBI couldn't officially authorize my recording activities, but they could certainly use any evidence I obtained through my own initiative. The final piece of my preparation involved the cottage itself. Using my legitimate ownership rights, I secretly hired my own real estate attorney to review any potential sale documents. What I discovered was that Thomas's buyers weren't actually purchasing the property. They were representatives of Riverside Financial Services, the loan shark operation that had been lending money to casino gamblers at illegal interest rates. The cottage sale was actually a debt seizure disguised as a legitimate real estate transaction. But here's what my father didn't know. Michigan law requires legitimate ownership documentation for any property transfer, and Rose Morrison's will specifically prohibited using the cottage as collateral for any debt not directly related to property maintenance. The sale was completely illegal even with a forged power of attorney. By the time I returned from Seattle, I had enough evidence to destroy Thomas's entire criminal conspiracy. Audio recordings of his confessions, financial documentation, proving the forgeries, and federal investigators ready to arrest his criminal associates. All I had to do was let him think his plan was working while I prepared to spring the trap that would send him to prison for the rest of his life. Standing in that empty cottage watching Thomas hand me a $15,000 check and order me to disappear forever, I almost felt sorry for him. He had no idea that his daughter had inherited her grandmother's talent for strategic thinking, or that Rose Morrison had taught me the most important lesson of all: never let anyone see your real plan until it's too late for them to stop it. Thomas discovered my investigation on a cold Tuesday morning when he found the hidden recording device under his desk. I was in the office early reviewing construction permits with Martha when we heard shouting from my father's private workspace. The sound of papers being thrown, drawers slamming, and what sounded like furniture being overturned. "Diana, get in here right now." I found him standing behind his desk, holding the small electronic device in his palm like evidence of betrayal. His face was flushed red with anger, but underneath the rage, I could see something else: fear. You've been spying on me. I've been protecting myself from a criminal." He threw the device across the room where it shattered against the wall. "How long have you been recording my conversations?" "Long enough to know about your gambling debts, your plan to frame me for embezzlement, and your intention to flee to Mexico with $2 million of stolen money." Thomas sank into his chair, suddenly looking older than his 58 years. "You don't understand the situation, Diana. These people I owe money to, they're not patient. They'll hurt you if I don't pay them. They'll hurt me anyway once they realize you've been using my name on loan documents without permission." "I was trying to protect the family business. You were trying to save your own skin by destroying mine." For a moment, something like remorse flickered in his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by the cold calculation I'd seen at the cottage. "Diana, we can work this out. Split the cottage money, pay off the debts together, start fresh somewhere new. Father and daughter partners in a new venture." "Like hell." That's when Marcus Kowalski walked into the office without knocking. Marcus was exactly what I'd expected from his voice on the recording, 6 feet tall, broad shoulders, and wearing an expensive suit that didn't quite hide what was probably a shoulder holster. 2 other men flanked him, both looking like they'd be more comfortable breaking legs than discussing business. "Thomas, we have a problem. Our mutual friends at Riverside are getting impatient about their money." "Marcus, not now. I'm having a family discussion with my daughter." Marcus studied me with cold blue eyes. "Diana Morrison, we've been looking forward to meeting you. I don't believe we've been introduced." "Marcus Kowalski, business associate of your father's. You've been a very expensive young lady for our organization." I stood up straighter, channeling my grandmother's backbone. "I haven't borrowed a penny from your organization." "According to our paperwork, you've personally guaranteed $350,000 in casino debts, plus interest and penalties that brings your current obligation to $420,000. Those documents are forgeries." Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's not our concern, sweetheart. Your father signed contracts transferring his debts to you as collateral for his gambling privileges. The casino considers you fully responsible." "Then the casino is going to be disappointed." One of Marcus's associates stepped closer, and I noticed the bulge of a weapon under his jacket. "Miss Morrison, we don't like disappointment." That's when my father made the mistake of trying to take control of the situation. "Marcus, leave Diana alone. I told you the cottage sale would cover everything. The money transfers to my account this afternoon." "Thomas, there's been a complication with the cottage transaction. Seems the property has some legal issues that need resolution before we can complete the purchase." My father's face went pale. "What kind of legal issues?" "Questions about legitimate ownership, forged power of attorney documents, federal investigators asking uncomfortable questions about money laundering." I felt a surge of satisfaction. Agent Walsh had been busy implementing our plan while I dealt with family drama. "That's impossible," Thomas stammered. "I have full authority to sell that property." "Not anymore," I said quietly. "I've filed injunctions blocking any transfer until the FBI completes their investigation into fraudulent loan documents." Marcus turned his attention back to me with new interest. "You've been talking to federal agents." "I've been cooperating with their investigation into organized crime connections at Golden Eagle Casino. Turns out they're very interested in loan sharks who target vulnerable gamblers." "Diana, shut up." Thomas jumped out of his chair. "You don't know what you're dealing with." "I know exactly what I'm dealing with. Criminals who prey on addiction and use forged documents to steal from innocent people." Marcus's expression hardened. "Miss Morrison, you seem to think federal agents can protect you from business obligations. That's a dangerous assumption." "Maybe, but they can certainly protect me from extortion and criminal threats." I pulled out my phone and showed them the recording app that had been running since Marcus entered the office. "Every word of this conversation is being transmitted live to FBI servers. Agent Walsh is probably already dispatching units to arrest you for intimidation and conspiracy." The room went completely quiet. Marcus stared at my phone screen, then looked at his associates with growing alarm. "Thomas, you said your daughter was just a naive architect. You didn't mention she was working with federal law enforcement." "I didn't know." Thomas's voice cracked with panic. "She never told me about any FBI contact." "Well, she's telling you now." Marcus stepped back toward the door. "And we're leaving before this situation gets any worse." "Wait," Thomas called after them. "What about my debt? What about the arrangement?" Marcus paused in the doorway. "Your daughter just made your debt irrelevant, Thomas. We don't do business with federal informants. You're on your own." After they left my father and I sat in silence for several minutes, I could hear Martha typing in the outer office, pretending she hadn't heard every word of the confrontation. "Diana, you've destroyed everything. Those people will kill me before they let me testify against them." "Then you better hope the FBI can provide adequate protection for cooperative witnesses." "I'm not testifying against anyone." "Yes, you are, because the alternative is 20 years in federal prison for fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and conspiracy with organized crime." Thomas stared at me with something approaching awe. "When did you become so ruthless?" "I learned from the best. Grandma Rose taught me never to start a fight unless I was prepared to finish it." "Your grandmother would be ashamed of what you're doing to family." "My grandmother would be proud that I refused to let a weak man destroy her life's work." I walked to the office safe and entered my personal combination, removing the files I'd hidden there weeks earlier. Every document Thomas thought he'd destroyed. Every piece of evidence proving his criminal conspiracy. "Dad, you have one choice. Cooperate with federal investigators, testify against Marcus and his associates, and spend 5 years in minimum security prison for financial fraud. Or fight the charges and spend the rest of your life in maximum security for racketeering." 5 years. "I've already negotiated your plea agreement with Agent Walsh. Full cooperation, complete restitution to all victims, and forfeiture of any assets purchased with stolen money." Thomas looked at the evidence spread across his desk, then at my determined expression. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I saw him recognize that his daughter was no longer the trusting young woman he'd tried to manipulate. "Diana, I never meant for things to go this far. The gambling just got out of control, and when I started losing, I panicked." "I know, Dad. That's why I'm giving you a way out instead of letting you rot in prison." "What happens to the cottage?" "The cottage comes back to me exactly as Grandma intended, along with every penny you stole from our clients and the company." He nodded slowly, accepting defeat. "When do I surrender to the FBI?" "Agent Walsh is waiting in the parking lot. She's been there since Marcus arrived." Thomas looked out the window at the black SUV that had been sitting across the street. "You planned all of this?" "I planned to survive your betrayal and protect our family's reputation. Everything else was just details." "Your grandmother really would be proud of you." "I hope so, because I'm about to spend the next 5 years rebuilding everything you tried to destroy." I walked him to the door where Agent Walsh and 2 other federal agents were waiting to place him under arrest. As they read him his rights and loaded him into their vehicle, I felt the weight of the last month finally lifting from my shoulders. But the hardest part was still ahead. I had to rebuild Morrison Construction, repay every stolen dollar to our clients, and somehow restore trust in a business that my father had nearly destroyed through his weakness and greed. Standing in the office that would now be entirely mine to manage, I thought about Rose Morrison and the lessons she'd taught me about resilience, integrity, and the importance of fighting for what's right. My father had tried to destroy me to save himself. Instead, he'd discovered exactly what happened when you underestimated a woman who'd been raised by one of the strongest people who ever lived. The federal courthouse in Bay City buzzed with activity as Thomas's plea hearing began on a gray October morning. I sat in the gallery watching my father shuffle to the defendant's table in orange prison coveralls, his hands cuffed and his eyes focused on the floor. Agent Walsh had spent 3 months building an airtight case against Marcus Kowalski's criminal organization, using Thomas's testimony and my recordings to map out an extensive loan sharking and money laundering operation that stretched across 5 states. But this morning brought an unexpected twist that would test everything I'd learned about strategic thinking. "Your Honor," the federal prosecutor announced, "the defendant Thomas Morrison has provided crucial intelligence about organized crime activities. However, new evidence has emerged that may complicate his cooperation agreement." I leaned forward concerned. Agent Walsh had assured me that my father's plea bargain was solid contingent only on his continued cooperation with the investigation. "What new evidence?" Judge Hamilton asked. "Mr. Morrison's criminal associates have obtained what they claim is proof that the primary witness in this case, Diana Morrison, has been manipulating evidence and colluding with federal agents to frame innocent businessmen." My blood went cold. I looked around the courtroom and spotted Marcus Kowalski sitting in the back row, with his expensive attorney smiling confidently at the defense table. Thomas's lawyer stood up with a thick folder of documents. "Your Honor, we have sworn affidavits from casino employees claiming that Diana Morrison has been gambling heavily for months and owes substantial debts to legitimate gaming establishments. We also have evidence that she forged her father's signature on loan documents to cover her own financial obligations." "This is ridiculous," I whispered to Jake, who was sitting beside me as my legal counsel. "Furthermore," the defense attorney continued, "we have audio recordings proving that Diana Morrison threatened to frame her father for crimes she committed herself using his trust in her to gather false evidence against innocent parties." Judge Hamilton reviewed the submitted documents with a skeptical expression. "These are serious allegations. Ms. Morrison, please approach the bench." I walked forward on unsteady legs, feeling the weight of every eye in the courtroom. This was exactly the scenario Thomas had originally planned, making me look like the real criminal while he played the victim. "Ms. Morrison, have you been gambling at Golden Eagle Casino?" "No, Your Honor. I visited the casino exactly once 3 months ago to investigate my father's activities there." "Do you have proof of that single visit?" "Yes, Your Honor. Credit card receipts, security camera footage, and witness statements from casino employees who spoke with me about my father's gambling problems." The defense attorney produced a casino security photo showing me at a blackjack table with chips in front of me. "This image was taken 6 weeks ago, Your Honor. Ms. Morrison appears to be actively gambling." I studied the photograph carefully. It was definitely me, but something was wrong with the timestamp and lighting. "Your Honor, this image has been digitally altered. I can prove that I was in Detroit on the date shown meeting with federal investigators." "Can you provide documentation of that meeting?" Agent Walsh stood up in the gallery. "Your Honor, I can confirm that Ms. Morrison was cooperating with federal agents on the date in question. This photograph is falsified evidence." Marcus's attorney objected. "Agent Walsh has obvious bias in favor of her informant. These criminal allegations must be investigated independently." Judge Hamilton looked increasingly frustrated with the competing claims. "This hearing is becoming a trial of the witness rather than the defendant. I'm ordering a recess while the prosecution and defense provide additional documentation to support their positions." During the break, Agent Walsh pulled me into a private conference room with a grim expression. "Diana, this is more sophisticated than we expected. Someone has been preparing a counterframe job for weeks, probably since Thomas was arrested." "How is that possible?" "Marcus's organization includes computer specialists and document forgers. They've created fake evidence designed to discredit your testimony and make your father look like a victim." What about the recordings they can't fake Thomas's own voice confessing to fraud? Agent Walsh hesitated. They're claiming the recordings were edited and manipulated. Without the original devices and technical analysis, it's difficult to prove authenticity in court. My hands started shaking. After months of careful planning, I was facing the exact nightmare Thomas had originally intended, being framed for his crimes while he walked free. Agent Walsh, what happens if the judge believes they're fake evidence? Your father's plea agreement becomes invalid. The charges against Marcus's organization get dismissed due to tainted evidence, and you potentially face prosecution for perjury and obstruction of justice. I sat down heavily in the uncomfortable conference room chair, feeling the walls closing in around me. But then I remembered something Rose Morrison had told me during our last conversation before she died. Diana, when someone tries to defeat you using lies, the truth becomes your most powerful weapon. But you have to be willing to reveal everything, even the secrets that might hurt you. Agent Walsh, what if I told you there's one piece of evidence that Thomas doesn't know about, something that proves his guilt beyond any possible doubt? What kind of evidence? I reached into my purse and pulled out a small key that I'd been carrying for 5 years. This opens a safety deposit box that my grandmother left me. She made me promise never to use it unless our family was in serious legal trouble. What's in the box? I don't know. But Rose Morrison was the smartest person I ever knew, and she always said the most important evidence should be saved for the most dangerous moment. An hour later, we sat in the vault of First National Bank while I opened safety deposit box 247 for the first time since my grandmother's death. Inside was a thick envelope addressed to me in Rose's distinctive handwriting. My dearest Diana, the letter began. If you're reading this, then Thomas has finally allowed his weaknesses to threaten our family's future. I've been watching him struggle with gambling and alcohol for years, hoping he would find the strength to change. But I've also been preparing for the possibility that he might try to destroy you to save himself. The envelope contained original documents that made my hands tremble as I read them. Thomas's birth certificate showing that he was adopted and not Rose's biological son. Legal papers proving that the cottage and construction business belonged entirely to Rose's bloodline, with no inheritance rights for Thomas. And most devastating of all, a secretly recorded conversation from 2 years ago where Thomas admitted to slowly poisoning Rose with prescription medications to accelerate her death and gain access to her assets. Agent Walsh, this changes everything. She read through the documents with growing amazement. Diana, your grandmother suspected Thomas was going to kill her. She suspected, but she couldn't prove it. So she documented everything and waited to see if he would act on his plans. These medical records show unexplained medication interactions that could have caused her heart problems. I felt tears building in my eyes as I realized the full scope of what my grandmother had endured. She died protecting me from a man I trusted completely. The recorded conversation was devastating. Thomas's voice clear and unmistakable, discussing how increasing Rose's heart medication would make her death look natural while allowing him to inherit her property before Diana could claim it. Diana, this isn't just evidence of fraud. This is evidence of murder. When we returned to the courthouse, the atmosphere had changed completely. Judge Hamilton reviewed Rose's documents with increasing seriousness, while Thomas sat at the defense table looking confused about why the hearing had been delayed. Mr. Morrison, the judge said finally, new evidence has emerged regarding your relationship with the alleged victim in this case. Evidence suggesting that your crimes extend far beyond financial fraud. Thomas's lawyer requested a private conference, but it was too late. Agent Walsh was already reading him additional charges: elder abuse, conspiracy to commit murder, and violation of inheritance law. As federal agents placed my father in handcuffs for the second time, he finally looked at me with something approaching recognition. "Diana, I never meant for Rose to get hurt. I just needed money to cover my debts." "You killed my grandmother for money, then tried to frame me for your other crimes. There's nothing you could say that would make any of this forgivable." Marcus Kowalski and his associates were arrested in the courthouse hallway, their fake evidence exposed as part of a criminal conspiracy to obstruct justice. The entire loan sharking operation collapsed within hours as federal agents raided casino offices and financial institutions across 3 states. But the victory felt hollow as I thought about Rose Morrison alone in her final months, knowing that the son she'd raised was slowly murdering her for inheritance money. That evening, I sat in the cottage that was finally legally completely mine, reading my grandmother's final letter by the light of her favorite reading lamp. "Diana, I hope you never have to use this evidence, but if you do, remember that justice isn't about revenge. It's about protecting future victims from people who choose cruelty over conscience. Thomas made his choices. Now you must make yours. Choose strength, choose integrity, and choose to build something better from the ashes of what he tried to destroy. I love you more than words can express, and I trust you to honor our family's true values. Your loving, Grandma Rose." I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope, knowing that I would read it again whenever I needed to remember why fighting for truth was worth the pain of losing the father I thought I knew. Tomorrow, I would begin rebuilding Morrison Construction as a company that honored honest work and protected vulnerable families from exploitation. It would be slow, difficult work, but it was the right work. Rose Morrison had given me the tools to survive betrayal and emerge stronger. Now it was time to use those tools to create something worthy of her memory and her sacrifice. 6 months later, I stood in the renovated offices of Morrison Construction, watching our crews prepare for the largest project in company history, a community center for families affected by gambling addiction, funded entirely by the assets recovered from Thomas's criminal activities. The transformation had been remarkable. Federal investigators had traced every stolen dollar, recovering $460,000 hidden in offshore accounts that Thomas had planned to access from Mexico. The casino was forced to return an additional $200,000 in loans that had been illegally secured using forged documents. Morrison Construction now employed 26 people, including several former clients who had lost money to Thomas's schemes. Mrs. Patterson, whose kitchen renovation had been delayed by stolen funds, now served as our client relations manager. The Jenkins family, whose garage addition had been abandoned mid-project, were hired as project coordinators after demonstrating exceptional organizational skills during their lawsuit recovery process. "Diana, the Community Center Foundation is poured and ready for framing," called out David Jenkins from the construction trailer. "We're actually 2 days ahead of schedule." "Excellent work, David. How are the client interviews going for the counseling center?" "We have 12 families signed up for the first support group sessions. People are really excited about having local resources for gambling addiction recovery." The irony wasn't lost on me. Thomas's destruction had created an opportunity to build something genuinely helpful for people struggling with the same addiction that had destroyed him. Agent Walsh stopped by the office that afternoon with updates on the federal prosecution. Marcus Kowalski and his associates had been sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for racketeering and money laundering. The casino had lost its gaming license and faced millions in federal fines for facilitating illegal loan operations. "How is Thomas adjusting to prison?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "He's in protective custody at a minimum security facility in Pennsylvania. The elder abuse charges were reduced to manslaughter as part of his cooperation agreement. He'll serve 12 years with possibility of parole in 8. 12 years felt simultaneously too long and not long enough for someone who had murdered his own mother and tried to frame his daughter for criminal conspiracy. Agent Walsh, do you think he ever understood how much damage he caused? Diana, I've been investigating white-collar crime for 15 years. Most people who commit these offenses convince themselves they're victims of circumstances rather than authors of their own destruction. Your father probably still believes he was just unlucky rather than criminal. What about the other victims, the families he stole from? Full restitution has been paid to every client plus interest and damages. Several families have used the settlement money to start new businesses or pay for education. Your father's crimes accidentally became a source of opportunity for people who deserved better. That evening, I walked through the cottage that had been completely restored to its original condition. Rose's furniture had been recovered from storage and returned to its proper places. Her books lined the shelves exactly as they had during my childhood summers. Even her secret safe had been repaired and reinstalled behind the fireplace. But the most meaningful addition was Rose's final gift to me, a complete set of architectural drawings for expanding the cottage into a family retreat center. Plans she'd been developing in secret, anticipating that Diana would someday want to use the property to help other families heal from trauma and betrayal. The drawings showed additions for group meeting spaces, private counseling rooms, and comfortable overnight accommodations for families participating in recovery programs. Everything designed with Rose's signature attention to detail and her understanding of how physical spaces could promote emotional healing. I spread the blueprints across her dining room table, studying the careful specifications and thoughtful design elements. This was her real legacy, not just a cottage or a construction company, but a vision of using our family's skills to create spaces where broken people could find hope and healing. 6 months from now, the Rose Morrison Family Recovery Center would open its doors to families torn apart by addiction, financial fraud, and domestic betrayal. We would provide counseling, legal assistance, and practical support for people rebuilding their lives after trauma. The center would be staffed by experts in addiction recovery, family therapy, and financial planning, but it would also employ people who had survived similar experiences and could offer the kind of understanding that only comes from personal struggle and eventual triumph. Mrs. Henderson, my elderly neighbor who had witnessed Thomas's deception, volunteered to coordinate volunteer services. Martha Steinberg, my father's former secretary, accepted a position managing administrative operations. Even Jake, my cousin, who had provided legal guidance throughout the investigation, agreed to provide pro bono legal services for families dealing with financial exploitation. As I sat in Rose's reading chair that night, I thought about the unexpected path that had brought me to this moment. Thomas's betrayal had nearly destroyed me, but it had also revealed strengths I never knew I possessed and connected me with people committed to building something better from the wreckage of broken trust. The cottage felt peaceful in ways it never had when I was consumed with anger and the need for justice. Now it was becoming what Rose had always intended, a place where family legacy could be used to heal rather than harm. My phone buzzed with a text message from David Jenkins. Diana just wanted to say, thank you again for giving our family a chance to rebuild. Working on the recovery center has helped us heal from what your father put us through. We're proud to be part of something that will help other families avoid the pain we experienced. I smiled, realizing that Thomas's greatest failure hadn't been his crimes against me or even against Rose. His greatest failure had been his inability to understand that trust, once rebuilt through honest effort, creates stronger foundations than fear and manipulation ever could. The Rose Morrison Family Recovery Center would serve as a permanent reminder that betrayal doesn't have to be the end of a family story. Sometimes it's the beginning of a better chapter, written by people who choose healing over revenge and hope over bitterness. I walked to the window overlooking Lake Huron, where moonlight painted silver paths across the water that had soothed my childhood fears and inspired my dreams of building beautiful, lasting structures. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, construction deadlines, client meetings, and the ongoing work of rebuilding trust in a community that had been hurt by my father's crimes. But tonight, I felt the deep satisfaction of knowing that Rose Morrison's granddaughter had honored her memory by choosing strength over victimhood and creation over destruction. The cottage would remain in our family for generations, but now it would serve a purpose larger than personal comfort. It would be a place where broken families could discover that love properly supported by wisdom and honest effort really could overcome any betrayal. And someday, when people asked about the Morrison family legacy, they would remember not the man who chose addiction and crime, but the women who chose resilience and service to others. That was the kind of memorial Rose deserved, and the kind of future that would make her proud. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right, even when the cost was enormous? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments about how we can rebuild trust after betrayal and support families dealing with similar challenges. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and consider subscribing for more stories about overcoming family trauma and finding hope after devastating betrayal. And don't forget to share this with anyone who might need to hear that it's possible to survive even the worst family betrayal and create something beautiful from the pain. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope Rose's legacy of turning pain into purpose inspires you to find your own path to healing and justice.